So, where did we come from? Take a look around at all this stuff in the world. Where did it all come from? How are we here? That's what we're going to be looking at tonight as we open up our apologetic series. We're going to go through some tough questions of the origin, where did we come from, the meaning of life, what morality is, how do we tell right from wrong, and lastly, what is our final destiny through all these things. That's what we're going to be looking at, and we're going to have some tough conversations over the next couple weeks. But I want to start you guys off with this quote from William G.T. Shedd. And this is what he has to say. A ship is safe in the harbor, but that's not what ships are for. And I say that because a lot of times we as Christians, we can get very complacent and very lazy when it comes to apologetics, especially in this area here. If we are going to be like ships, we are designed to go out into those deep waters and adventure and to learn more about what God has in store for us, how God has shaped us, and learn more about Him. And I think that, honestly, a lot of Christians and churches have really, dropped the ball in this area, especially when it comes to the origin. And we use things, or we say things like, we just have faith in God, or I don't understand it, but I just believe that God has faith in it. Honestly, if you ask me, that's just lazy apologetics. That's you not taking the time to actually come up with a strong answer, and we just kind of use God to fill in the gaps where we don't necessarily understand something. And that's not going to be helpful at all to your own faith. Because once someone comes back at you with an answer that maybe does fill in that gap, whether it's right or wrong, or whether we agree with it, but anytime someone can fill in that gap for you that you don't have, that's going to suddenly start to undermine your faith in God. If you're just having faith by faith and you don't have an answer, someone tries to give you an answer, it's not going to go well for your faith. So I say all that to say that we have this topic of the origin. And we're going to look at some crazy specifics in a minute, but it's so important to have a strong understanding of where did we come from? Why are we here? How did we get here? And that's what we're going to look at tonight. So let me just throw out some quick facts about the universe. Okay. And these are not debatable. These are just, is what it is. Everyone agrees with this across the scientific spectrum. First off, the Earth is 1 in 7 quintillion. That is 1 in 7 with 20 zeros behind it. That's crazy. And I say that because of all the different stars and stuff that we've looked at. Everything in our universe, we look at all the different planets and galaxies and stars and everything out there. Earth is the only one of 7 quintillion. We've been able to observe 7 quintillion planets, stars, everything out there. Earth is the only one of those that has life on it. That's crazy. On top of that, it is the perfect size for gravity. Gravity, as you know, is one large mass of matter pulling another mass towards it, same way that there is gravity pulling the Earth towards the sun to keep it in orbit. If our Earth was just a little bit bigger, like a 1/10 of 1% bigger something is, the more gravitational pull it has. So if Earth is just even that 1/10 of 1% bigger, then the gravity would be way too strong. We would all need to have superhuman muscles just to be able to stand up, because the gravity would be so strong pulling us down through the Earth. Same thing, if it was even just a 1/10 of 1% smaller, then it'd be like living on the moon. It'd be almost impossible to stay on the Earth. The distance from the sun, because of that gravitational pull, but as well, if we were even a couple thousand kilometers, a few 100,000, or even 100,000 kilometers closer to the sun, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot when you look at the overall size. But if we were just even that little bit closer to the sun, we would be getting too much heat, and the oceans would basically evaporate because there'd be so much heat because we're too close to that. If we're even a couple 100,000 kilometers further away, we wouldn't be getting enough heat, and the oceans would freeze over, and life would not be habitable for us. That's crazy. On top of that, even though as we're in the perfect spot, we've also got the exact perfect atmosphere for protection. With the ozone layer that we have around us, it is just so perfect that it allows just the right amount of light to come in and just the right amount of heat to come in. If it was a little bit thinner, then all the heat would separate, and we would also have we would have all this radiation coming in from the sun, and we would get burned up so easily, like sunburn, by just stepping outside for a second. The ozone layer is just perfect for that. And as well, we've got a moon that is perfectly placed around us, which gives us tides and weather patterns and all that. The moon itself is in that perfect place for us. All that goes into all these major factors of life. And we've learned about all kinds of other geology and how mountains are formed, and physics and other things of how the world operates. But when you look at all the crazy intricacies, here's the question that you have to ask, or the two possible conclusions that you could have. One, wow, what are the chances of all this happening? This is amazing. What are the chances of this happening? We're so lucky. Or, wow, God is amazing. Look at how perfectly designed this is. So how did it all begin? Where did it all come from? How did it begin? You've really only got two options in this regard. You could either say that matter is eternal, or matter invented itself. So the first one, matter is eternal. Well, Edwin Hubble, I don't know if you've heard that term before, but we have like the Hubble telescope. It's named after this guy. Edwin Hubble was the first person to look through a telescope out into the universe and see all these different stars. And the conclusion that he came to was that he saw that all these stars and galaxies that are around us are expanding and moving away from us. He was the one that came up with the expanding universe theory. And the logical conclusion from that, if we go forward in time and the universe is expanding, then if you go backwards in time, that means the universe had to have a starting point. It had to have like unexpanded into something. And since you can't have negative space, there had to have been a starting point. So matter is not eternal. We all agree across the scientific community that there was a starting point for the universe. The other idea is that matter created itself. All right, and somehow this energy from within caused a big bang and started the expansion process and started the evolution that we talk about. The only problem with that is that goes completely against all the laws of thermodynamics that we have, because one, we know that matter cannot be created or destroyed, it's merely transferred. Like if I boil water on my stove at home, I'm not destroying water, I'm changing it from states, from a liquid to a gas state. It's not created or destroyed, it just changes states. Same with energy. Energy is the same way. You've got your mechanical energy, your electrical energy, your gravitational energy, and heat energy, and all these different kinds of things. You cannot create it or destroy it. It just changes states. It transfers from, a light bulb. You put in electrical energy and out comes light energy or heat energy, which gives off light, whatever it is. It's not created or destroyed. It's merely transferred. Now, all that to say is, how in the world did something explode from nothing? Not to mention it goes against all the laws of physics and thermodynamics that we have. Atheists would say, how did it start off? Well, we don't know, but that's what we believe. Christians would say, we believe God did it, but we can't necessarily prove it. So here comes the next thing. Atheists say, we don't know. They'll admit that we don't know. Christians will say, well, we believe that God did it, but we can't prove it. So what do? We appeal to something that's called the most likely conclusion, the most logical conclusion. Now, let's take a look at this for a second. And that's just matter that we talked about, okay? That's like, dirt and rocks and all that sort of stuff. Let's go into living organisms now. This is where it gets crazy. Listen to this. Okay, so in an organism, you've got overall organisms. Inside of that, you have cells. Inside cells, you have DNA. And then inside DNA, you have proteins. Okay? And, we look at Charles Darwin, when he wrote The Origin of the Species, he was the guy who really started the idea of things evolved. All he could really see was organisms and cells. Okay, this is back in 1869 when he wrote The Origin of the Species. We didn't have microscopes that were nearly as advanced as they are today. So all he could see was organisms and cells. So if you've got that level of understanding of how living organisms work, you could, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt to say that you could make that assumption that, we evolved, if all you can see is the cells. However, British mathematician Roger Penrose said the odds of life starting its own are the equivalent of 1 times 10 to the power of 123 of these DNA proteins making themselves start on their own. This is where it gets even more interesting. Stephen Meyer is a scientist. If you want to know, if you don't know who he is, let me give you a quick breakdown. He has a PhD from Cambridge University in England. Okay, so not only is he one of the smartest men on the planet, he has a PhD from one of the top universities in the world. Okay, so this dude is crazy, crazy smart. In this field, what he did and how he broke it down. So inside DNA, you have proteins. So you've got like the DNA is like the helix thing, and then those lines going across, those are the proteins. And then even inside of those proteins, what happens is you've got a strand of 20 different proteins that have to line up perfectly in a row, or else the whole thing won't work. Now, that's in one strand. To get even the most basic life form, simple life form, it has to line up those 20 times 150 in a row. Okay, so not only do you have like a 1 in 20 for the first strip of protein, then you've got another 1 in 20 chance. So you multiply those two together. So now it's not 1 in 40, it's 1 in 20 times 20. So it's 1 in 400 times another 20 again. So now you've got 8,000, and we're only at 3. Okay, so when you go that 1 times the 1 in 20 times 150, you get 1 times 10 to the power of 195. The odds of that happening are equivalent to this, and this is what's crazy. That's the equivalent of winning the lottery every day 1,000 years in a row. That's just crazy. And that's for even the simplest life forms to have evolved on their own. Just the odds of that are astronomical. It borders on impossible. But here's the thing. When you look at what atheists have to say, and what they'll say is the University of Utah, in their biology textbooks, they say that life is little more than chemical reactions. That's just what it is. Life equals time plus chance plus natural selection. That's how they would view life. Time plus chance plus natural selection. Richard Dawkins, who's probably one of the most famous and outspoken atheists right now in the world, again, very smart man. But what he has to say is we animals exist for genetic preservation and are nothing more than their throwaway survival machines. I'll say it again because it's kind of wordy. We animals exist for genetic preservation and are nothing more than their throwaway survival machines. Human life is just disposable. The whole point of us is for our genetics, which have evolved to where we are. The whole point is to pass on your genetics and preserve your genes. And our bodies are just the throwaway means that they use for survival. And that's the mindset that you have to take if you believe that we came from chance and we have no reason to be here. That's where your mind goes to, is that there is no point to this life. All we are is just, we're here one day and gone the next. Who cares? There's nothing else. That's the attitude you have to take. The problem with that I find is it's extremely inconsistent with how people live. So if all we are is just chance of getting here, there is no purpose, no rhyme or reason, then how do we determine value of life? How do we decide that somebody is worth more than another person? Or why, if you ask me, why are people out there rioting because Black Lives Matter? Like, where do you get the idea that any lives matter at that point, if that's the belief that you hold to? I work with high school students, and I've read all kinds of articles. I know the level of statistics that are out there of how many high school students are struggling with mental illnesses right now. And and all these so many problems right now. And a lot of them are either going to counseling or probably should need counseling. But if life is pointless and there's really no purpose to it, we're just here one day, gone the next, then what is even the point of counseling at that point? One guy, I'm blanking on his name, but he made the argument is that he asked someone that was pro-abortion, and he said to them, like, do you believe the idea that we're just here for, genetic preservation? Just the whole point is just to pass on your genes and move along? They said, well, yeah, I guess so. I would believe that. So then why are you pro-abortion? Because that really goes against the whole purpose of life that you would aspire to. If the whole point of life is just to pass on your genes and move on and that's it, then abortion is kind of going against that because it hinders your ability to pass on your genes. Here's the thing. A pointless origin, if there is no point to the start of life, a pointless origin leads to a pointless life. That's the attitude that you have to take if you aspire to that worldview. Amir Axel, he's a guy that wrote an article in Time magazine in 2014. So look, if you write an article for Time magazine, like that's a pretty big deal. Like you've made it in your field. This is what he has to say, which surprisingly, he opens up the article by kind of, ripping on Christians and the God of the Bible and all that. And he claims to be an atheist, but reading this, I would say he's more of an agnostic. But this is what he had to say. I know it's a little long, so hang with me, but this is what he has to say, and I think this is so crazy. Has modern science from the beginning of the 20th century proved that there is no God, as some commentators now claim? Science is an amazing, wonderful undertaking. It teaches us about life, the world, and the universe, but it has not revealed to us why the universe came into existence, nor what preceded its birth in the Big Bang. Biological evolution has not brought us the slightest understanding of how the first living organisms emerged from inanimate matter on this planet, and how the advanced cells, the highly structured building blocks of advanced life forms, ever emerge from simpler organisms. Neither does it explain one of the greatest mysteries of science. How did consciousness arise in living things? Where do symbolic thinking and self-awareness come from? What is it that allows humans to understand the mysteries of biology, physics, mathematics, engineering, and medicine? And what enables us to create great works of art, music, architecture, and literature? Science is nowhere near to explaining these deep mysteries. Science on its own is nowhere near able to explaining these deep mysteries. So, what I believe, I very strongly believe this. Outside of science, I believe that there was a God. And in the beginning, he said, let there be light. On day one, created light and darkness. On day number 2, he separated earth from the sky. On day number 3, he made land and vegetation. Day number 4, he made the sun and the moon. Day number 5, he made fish and birds. Day number 6, he made land animals. And finally, human beings. Then on the the 7th day, he rested. And all this is written out for you guys in Genesis chapter 1, if you guys want to read it for yourself. But that is the account that we believe. And that is, if you look at the science and look at the complexity of life and everything that's out there, it takes so much more faith to believe in the astronomical chances of evolution and life evolving on its own. I think it takes so much more faith to believe in that than it does to believe that something or someone created this universe. It's the idea of the watchmaker analogy. If you find a watch and you look how complex it is, the most likely conclusion is that there was a watchmaker. That's what's called the teleological argument. You look at something that appears to have design, the most likely conclusion is that there was someone who designed it. And I'll give you this analogy for us. I have a puppy. She's about 4 months old now. Her name is Echo. And I bought her back in I bought her back in April, but when she was 3 weeks old, but I couldn't bring her home until she was 8 weeks old, just because, puppies need to be with their mothers and they need to learn social behaviors from their litter mates. So in those 5 weeks after I bought her and before I could bring her home, I went out to PetSmart and I got her like a crate for her to sleep in. I got her all kinds of toys. I got her the right food. I went through my backyard to make sure that it was safe. I went through around my house and I made sure that all of my valuables were out of the way so that she wouldn't damage them in any way. And I made my house as safe as possible so that finally, when I brought Echo home, my beautiful little puppy, when she came home with me, she would have a beautiful place to live and a safe place for her to enjoy life. That is the image. And that is the picture of God creating life and creating the universe. We as human beings are his prized creation. We're the only thing in this world that was made in the image of God. So he spent days going through and creating something that was so perfect, so beautiful, so finely tuned, that finally, when he made human beings last, he says, I've got this great place that I've created for you. And now I've got a home for you to live in. Romans chapter 1 tells us that everything that's out there, all these beautiful parts of creation. Romans 1, 19 and 20. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. God has done an incredible job with such amazing detail. And I only scratched the surface of some of these things. I could spend another 2 hours going through all these crazy intricacies. But God did such an amazing job because he created us with a purpose. We're going to talk about that over the next couple weeks. But what I strongly believe is that we came and we are here because we were created specifically and so finely tuned by a loving God. That's what I believe. Now, I know I've thrown a lot of numbers and information at you. I'm not expecting you to remember all this. If you want, you can talk to me after and I can get you my sermon notes, or I can send you to some of the different resources that I use that were really helpful to me. But look, the whole point is that just observing the universe, the most likely conclusion, I believe, is that God did it. When you look at the odds of everything coming into their own versus an outside force, I think the most likely conclusion is that God did it. Like what Romans chapter 1 says. They should have no excuse for not knowing God just by looking out at nature. The other thing that I want to kind of encourage you guys as we finish up tonight is that, as we're taking this message, as we have these conversations with people, keep in mind that this is probably not going to be the conversation that converts someone to Christianity, right? If you're having this argument with someone, or even if it's a civil conversation about the origin of life, there's a good chance that this is not the topic that's going to convert them. However, what we need to stress is that we were created by a loving God with an amazing purpose. We'll get more into detail to that in the next couple weeks, but that is the thing that we need to stress. Science is all over the place, and a lot of us aren't scientists, so we're not going to be able to articulate this very well. But I want us to remember, and we need to stress this when having these conversations with people, is that you have value. You were created. You are fearfully and wonderfully made by the same being that created the whole universe, and you were created with a purpose. That is what we need to be stressing in these conversations. So the whole point of this is to say, you know what? I don't know if I could really get on board with everything that they have to say, but I don't know if I can really get behind the God of the Old Testament and all the crazy stuff that's happened there. But I do know that I don't want to live a pointless life. I don't want to go through life not knowing what's going to happen, or not having direction in life. So maybe, just maybe, these conversations can bring people one step closer. If we do this right and we can emphasize what's important in this conversation, our goal should be to bring people at least one step closer to the church. Probably not going to convert them to Christianity over this, but if done right, this can be an amazing stepping stone to get people just a little bit closer to the church. Yes, I believe that God created it. Yes, I believe the science is on the side of Christianity when it comes to the origin of the universe. But keep in mind, the whole point of this conversation is that you were created so finely tuned with a purpose by a loving God. That is the focus of the conversation, and that's what we need to be sharing with others as we have these conversations.